is very near and dear to my heart. My experience is in international relations got started working with our local refugee community. And I oversaw government contracts specifically around employment programs. And this was back in the mid-2000s, around 2008, when we had a market crash, and it was very difficult to find jobs. When I was working with the refugee community, one thing became very apparent to me, and that is, while we were helping these incredible people try to find jobs in hotels, in restaurants, in warehouses and factories, we were missing a big part of what they contribute to our community as a whole, and that is, while those jobs are absolutely wonderful and needed, there were individuals resettling in our community that were doctors and lawyers and engineers and artists and scientists, and we were asking them to go work in McDonald's. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, but their talents and their skills and their abilities were so incredible. Why were we not helping them find jobs that were related to their experiences that they had? And so I partnered with the University of Utah to say, can we just figure out what is needed to get them to the same jobs that they were doing in their own countries? And we created this internship program and this education program where we essentially paid for internships and any kind of tests that were needed to return them to that work. And we saw such a change. We saw such a change in the dignity and the respect and the conversations that we were having around refugees integrating into our community. Now, the word diaspora, I am sort of a nerd and I look at the roots of words, right? Diaspora, well, it means a place of resettlement. It also means to scatter, to sow into a place. And what I see is that when we look at the value of people that are resettling in our communities, and we try to figure out ways to embed them deeply into the work that we're doing, we take the best things that they have to contribute with the best things that we have to contribute with the community, and we create this very strong, woven integration dialogue so that when conversations, say like deportation, come up, we can take a stand and say that we cannot lose these wonderful people who contribute so much to us as a whole on the community. With that, it is my goal this morning to challenge each of you to think deeply about the work that you do in your councils and try to explore ways in which you can integrate people, refugees, immigrants, diasporas, into our community as a whole, so that when we have to have those tough conversations, your councils will stand up and say, this is a wonderful asset to our communities, and take a stand for what is right. With that, I want to preface that I am completely humbled to be up here on stage with the two amazing women that I'm about to introduce. Their resumes are spectacular. How did I get chosen? Matthew, how did I get chosen? Seriously. Yeah. With that, I want to introduce Palina Louangketh, who is a former refugee from Laos. She now calls Idaho home, and we were just talking that there is not a Roller Council in Idaho, so maybe we have a new member, I don't know. She is the founder and CEO of the Idaho Museum of International Diaspora, and she is passionate about connecting the world of culture through storytelling. Hagir, Elsheikh, is a former refugee from Sudan, an advocate for justice, human rights. I love the description she gave me, which is a serial entrepreneur, which is amazing, and an avid storyteller as well. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
With those heels, yeah.
Do you want to test your microphones? Make sure they're on and working. Good morning. And you have one as well. Hello. Good morning. All right. So this is going to be a very thick conversation. We're going to try to keep on time, but we're also going to make sure that there's time for question and answers. So let's just jump right in. What are some of the misconceptions and biases about refugees or diasporas that you would like the community of councils to know about, and maybe give us just a few takeaways on how do we recognize what those biases and misconceptions are?
All right, good morning everyone, and thank you for being here at 8:15. This is a very, very big, huge topic that we cannot discuss in an hour, but hopefully by the time you leave here, we scratch something and we made you think and look and take this and put it to use. Biases. The only reason I have some notes here because I have a lot and I can go on and on. So everyone has biases. This is something that somebody will lie. They say they never discriminated against someone or never felt or had a stereotype or a bias in their brain. But for the topic of today, when we talk about a specific audience, biases, misconception, and prejudice, they're all ideas and thoughts. They become dangerous when we put those into policies, when we use our own biases and prejudice and making them affecting a larger group of people based on how we feel and how we think, or the amount of information that we receive, whether it's accurate, factual information or just a myth. But in order for us to find a solution and to get to the roots of every issue, we first have to confront our own biases. We have to find what do we see when we look at someone? What do we have ingrained in our brain when we think of Africa, when we think of women in general, or women coming from Africa? And I'm going to stay in Africa here because I'm originally from Sudan. So stereotypes and biases actively harm refugees, such as myself. We fall into three categories when someone looks at us, and I'm going to say me because I still identify as a refugee. Those attack either the culture, our culture, their character, my character, and my existence, or a refugee's existence. To me, those are the three for the time. Culture. Refugees are often labeled by the culture they are perceived, not who they are. Believe it or not, up to today, I came here 23 years ago, and this became my home. I still get go back home. I don't have a home. This is my home. Pennsylvania is my home. And I get the same question, and the thought that Africa and African are a single country, not a continent. With one culture, they tend to label African and Africa as poor, disease-ridden, uneducated, and prone to violence. Although some areas, just like any civilization, has its negative and positive aspects, but when the media only highlights the negativity and ignore the positive, it creates a confirmation bias. And that reinforces these misconceptions. And blindly, we follow these misconceptions in our daily life, and I am not, I can't say I'm not, and I didn't do that on my own personal life. We ignore the historical context that create these biases. When we talk about Africa, for example, let's acknowledge that poverty, war, and unequal opportunities in Africa was orchestrated. The reason Africa has been stripped of its resources is because of colonialism, right? Leaving political instability and destruction, wars, that led people to flee their safety and a refuge, just like myself. So when we label refugees from Africa, for an example, by their preconceived or our preconceived notion of African, we strip them of their humanity and individuality. That's the first one. The second is character. The refugee experience is not a monolith. So no two stories are alike. Just like with autism, we say when you meet one child with autism, you met one child with autism. When you met a refugee, you met one refugee. Just as none of us are the same. Yet society often categorizes refugees as illegal, burdensome, and outsiders. I lived in Pennsylvania for 23 years, and it's a beautiful state. But when I go to different states, I'm still considered an outsider, even though this is all I know. We saw this clearly, and for me personally, I came here June 6, 2001. Does that ring a bell? September 11 happened a couple months after, and I was new to the U.S. I fled from the same violence to come and face it in my new home, Pennsylvania, and moreover, to be looked at as part of the problem without knowing my story. And as much as I understand it now, and I understand the fear, and it was hurtful and hard for me to swallow back then because I am a victim of violence myself. And to come and be labeled as the problem, as a violence person, as a terrorist, because your name or your feature resembles someone who made an attack. That's summing up all refugees and someone who doesn't look like you with something that you don't know. So we are not, what I want to say in this area, that refugees mostly are not violent. Just like with any culture, people are good and bad. But for the most majority, refugees are fleeing or flying or left their homes to escape violence. And, by now you might just say, we don't know your story. I'm summarized to maybe one title. I wear many hats, but by looking at me, you will see the end result. You can search my name and see that, oh, she got her life put together. She's a serial entrepreneur. I am an author. I am active in my community. I'm an activist. I am, from the surface, you will say, what are you complaining about? But until you know somebody's story, you truly don't know who they are. I identify as a torture survivor. I don't care how many titles I have. I'm a torture survivor. I'm a refugee. I'm a woman rights and human rights activist. I was one of few female spokespersons for the Democratic Forefront in Sudan. And for that, I faced torture. I was hung from a tree for 10 hours, beaten from my head to my toe until my whole body was numb. I smelled my own blood. This was not an isolated incident. This happened over and over and over for 6 years. During the Al-Bashir regime, I was just 15 years old. But this is went through my college. You're not going to know the scar that I bear. I was beaten, my head was bashed open. This is all because I was speaking against the same violence that was labeled as such. We don't have time to tell you my whole story, but that journey, and to get to the point that there was a bounty put on my head so anyone can find me in Sudan, could kill me and not face any consequences. I was detained at the ghost house, and I'm sure many of you now might know what that, but back in the 90s, that was not known. Ghost, it means ghost. You are put in a place that no one knows where you're at. You are beaten, sexually assaulted, and at that time, they were sexually assaulting, which means they will strip you, they will hurt you if you don't get the full rate. And as sad as this sounds, I feel privileged I did not get assaulted to the max. But since 2013, women are subjected to that. That led me, with the help of the UN, to be forced to leave my home. And no one, not any refugee that I met and human beings, will tell you that they woke up one day and they said, I'm going to leave everything that I know, and I'm going to go start new somewhere where I'm going to be treated differently. People normally choose that as a surviving method, as a way to live. For me, it was either die, get sexually assaulted every day, human trafficked, which was, we were threatened by that, or leave for the unknown. I didn't know where I'm going to be placed. I stayed for a whole year as a refugee with the help of the UN. I was almost homeless. I did not know my future or anything. So to come here and you face, often refugees think that when they survive, they feel free to stop me when the time is.
You have 1 minute.
Oh, I don't want to stop you.
I don't want to stop you, but I do want to say that you're here for the rest of the day. So
yes,
so
but refugees often feel when they survive, the worst is over. But then we came here, and you face a whole new battle under a new sky. That's the only difference. And we will go through.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, that when we hear that a refugee resettles in our community, we're like, oh, you're safe, you're good. There's nothing else to worry about, right? This question for Palina, and that is, related to that idea of you're safe, now it's okay, but these global conflicts continue. The genocide in Sudan, South Sudan, so many places around the world have continued, ongoing in perpetuity. And what I notice is that we, especially as councils, are very reactionary to what is going on in the news. We have to be. People in our community are very curious about what is happening. But what that means is we see this pendulum of invisibility and hypervisibility. And how do we become, this is for Palina, how do we become more conscious of being reactionary and continue that conversation and hope that there is change one day?
Thank you, Felicia, and thank you, Hagir. I'm quite shaken up by her story. I think the simple answer to that, Felicia, is to be curious, right? To be so curious that you want to seek an understanding, you want to seek a connection. The work of my organization, the IMID, or the Idaho Museum of International Diaspora, which I founded, and I serve as the CEO and executive director, we've traveled around parts of the world to elevate the vulnerable, hidden voices, like Hagir's, that you don't get to hear, but on a platform where it is safe, where it is inviting, and that they are protected, but that you're also protected as well. Hagir's story, in my head, is in current context. If you were to back up 30 years prior to that, that was my story, my family's story. Back then, during the Vietnam era conflict, how many of you have heard the American War? How many of you have heard the Vietnam War? Right? They're the same. Nobody in Southeast Asia knows what the Vietnam War is. They know what the American War is, and vice versa here. Okay? I'll preface this by saying I'm a professor of multicultural studies. One of the courses that I teach that aligns with some of the thought-provoking concepts that Hagir brought up is the foundations of ethics and diversity. And what she was talking about with the biases is that we have to unpack all of that. To have biases, consciously or subconsciously, is very normal. It's a human reaction. And surprise, we on the other side have it as well, right? We have it about our white neighbors. We have it about our black neighbors. We have them about our own community members across many generations. So I don't want you to feel like anybody in this room has done or has thought anything wrong. What I want to talk about really is how do you elevate your levels of emotional intelligence, realizing that your actions, through your physical actions or your behaviors or your speech, how you dialogue with others, and how is that received on the receiving end to your intended one-person audience or many. If they're cringing, or if you think, oh my gosh, I've said something, and I think I've offended someone, or I've triggered something, take a step back and reevaluate what might have happened, and readjust. Everyone, for the most part, I believe that people have good intentions, it's just people don't understand. When my family and I arrived to the U.S., granted my father was scheduled for a public execution. He was a captain in the Royal Military. That was the signal to my parents that it was unsafe for us to be in Laos, which is where I was born. Completely unsafe. And so his journey started for him. And our journey started for us. So I don't know my father. That's another story to be told. The other aspect that I want to impart to you is how do we also, not only emotional intelligence, but how do we elevate cultural intelligence? Our awareness of our self-identity through our values, through our cultures. So one would look at me, when I've been back to Laos many times now, they don't call me Lao, they call me an American. What Lao woman in Laos would be sitting like how I am, with confidence, with poise? None. So they immediately pass judgment and bias, good or bad. Right? We do that. But it is so important for any of us to help to elevate ourselves in the context of emotions, right? Emotional intelligence, our behaviors or actions impacting maybe the international relationships that we have with others. And how do we elevate our levels of cultural intelligence, seeking awareness that, let's not talk about race right now and ethnicity. If you're a hugger and you reach over to hug somebody and they're just cringing, please don't proceed, right? Please don't proceed. That is a different approach, and you have to recognize that's probably not cool. It doesn't matter if they're the same age, the same race, the same gender as you are. They might be coming from a different set of values, of norms, and that's what I mean by cultural intelligence. So I impart that onto you. It is so important that, again, I can't emphasize enough that we seek to understand. In growing up in Idaho, how many of you know or familiar with Idaho politics? Yes. Whole potato talks is what I typically say. I worked all my life in trying to dispel myths and biases. When I launched the Idaho Museum of International Diaspora, or IMID, it began in front of a classroom, not my own. And of course, because we're in Idaho, many of the students, the 28 students, were all white, Caucasian, split between male and female. And I was dressed like I normally do. And as I got up, there were some hands folded, like, why is she presenting this? What's going on? And I had a student in the audience, right in the front, like you here, gentlemen, who raised his hand, he was almost interrupted. And I said, yes, what is your question? And he said, I hope I don't offend you or anybody by asking this, but why can't they stay where they're from? Wow. Oh my gosh, the fumes in me. If you held a potato next to me, it would probably turn into a baked potato, fully loaded potato. That was how fumigated I was. I could have responded with an attack, but I chose not to. This is the moment that I worked real hard to elevate my emotional intelligence and my cultural intelligence. He was a young guy, probably, 20 or so. I thought, well, the forces of Palina can't probably move or shake this young man. Because look, I'm different. I'm a woman. I'm probably a head and a half taller than he is, who knows, right? But the fact that he was a white man in Boise, Idaho, I thought, you know what, I'm going to arm myself with the power of the mass. So instead of responding to him directly, I said, If I may share with you my story, how many of you know that I'm a former refugee? He gave me the look of up and down. In my mind, I thought he was probably wondering, why am I not in my flip-flops? My refugee camp flip-flops. Right? How come I'm well-spoken? How come I don't have an accent? That was one of the things growing up. You don't have an accent. Well, I started kindergarten in Boise, Idaho. English became my primary language immediately. And then I asked all the class, how many of you know the real reasons why your ancestors, yours and yours, made the conscious decision or the forced decision to leave where they came originally from? Nobody knew. These were 20-year-olds. So the story has been lost across generations, from great-great-grandparents to the great-grandparents to the grandparents to the parents. It has been lost. The art of storytelling has been lost. That is the work of Hagir, that is the work of my organization, is how we work to connect the voices in the community, the broader community, to the cultural voices that exist within your community. So Hagir might seem so new. You can tell with her accent and her story is so raw. But for me, I'm almost 50 years old. I've lived a life and I've journeyed through a lived experience in Boise, Idaho. And I would say that when I apply judgment, when I apply critical thinking, I can tell you it's not from my Lao lens, it's from my Western lens. So you see, I'm an American. And it is only natural and normal that I apply those biases, but if we take a step back and observe our surroundings, we begin to realize that they're unique and I'm unique, and their story, I might give pause to listen to their story and build a relationship. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your insight, and I'm a storyteller, and you're storytellers also, and there's just something about sharing experiences that creates this common humanity. And I think that that's what we as councils do so well, is convene people who have a common interest in world affairs and wants to know how, and this is for either of you that wants to answer or both of you that want to answer, but how can we, as councils, as conveners of our community, that are talking about world affairs and how they impact us on a local level, use the privilege that we have to start breaking down barriers and systems that have been in place for a very long time, but also do it from a place where we are not conveying our privilege, our we call it American saviorism, right? How do we ignore that, but at the same time use our ability, use our force, use our words to start really challenging the systems that are in place?
Well, we all have privilege. That's something, I agree with Dr.Palina here. The idea is not, looking at yourself as the reason. We are all in this together. We can make a difference. We can use our privilege, and you might look at me or Palina and say, what privilege do you have? I have a loud voice, and I've been using it for 47 years. I don't step back from anything. I will fight a battle to the end. And some days are really hard. We just had a talk this morning with Joyce, and I said, yesterday, my daughter actually pushed me to come. I never lie down in any battle. There is a Sudanese murderer who got shot recently in the revolution. And he said, we are tired, my friend, but no one can lie down in the middle of a battle. And I never felt the need to lay down in any battle as I felt yesterday. With everything, with the climate, with the change, with you feel you are doing everything in your power to enlighten, to share. You do your best. I worked hard, as many And 20, maybe 18 years ago, when I started HSE, I started my first company. And how dare I wanted to be a CEO, starting a company, be a president of HSE staffing. I was working at the hospital. I changed my career. You might not know that my first degree was electrical engineer. When I came here, part of the issue, not just the language barrier, but the education barriers were set in place that did not allow me to continue on my engineering, even though I did electrical engineering just because women in Sudan were not allowed to be engineers. Not because I liked it, but I changed my career to nursing here. In medical, I went all the way to bachelor, master. That was not easy, wasn't an easy journey for me. But when I decided to own my own company, doing the same work that I did, and I was requested by name in the hospital in Pennsylvania, I received several awards for what I do. CEO by the name of Melissa said to me, and I'm not going to give her last name, but she said, who she thinks she is coming from, I don't know where, and want to be a CEO like me. And that for me was a push to keep going, and I said, watch me. The same thing, I had to meet with a small business administration council to review my plan and tell me if my business is good. He said to me, you have a great personality, you are knowledgeable, you can succeed, but you're not. You are going to file bankruptcy because you're a woman of color, and you have an accent. And 5 years after that, I went and met with him and I said, I'm still standing. And my company is still standing, and I had several other companies after that, but that's not the point. When you look at someone like me, I'm not the exception. This is one of the things that we tend to do unintentionally. I hear that a lot. You are good as a refugee. You are an example. So when we say things, we need to be really careful with how we say things. Just like the simple example of saying, I am not racist because I have one black friend. Or, I like those small things, or you are good for a refugee. Things that you might not say to harm someone. You are giving a compliment. I'm giving a compliment. Oh, your complexions. Are you sure you're from Africa? What is your idea of Africa? And a lot of people will literally come and touch my hair to make sure it's accurate. And I'm not saying this is in 1970. This is now. I mentor at high schools and colleges where young black women were touched, their hair were touched. That's why the Crown Act was created. There's so many things that you can use to influence policies in your daily life to make sure that when you go back to your council, to your city, when you hear those comments, although they are harmless maybe, you make sure you point them out and educate. I always say education and traveling is an antidote for ignorance. We don't need to travel far. The beauty of America, and I can say that, the beauty of America, I traveled everywhere, and this is my country. I love this country as you, as anybody else, and the beauty is it's a melting pot. You can look anywhere, especially in civilian, your neighbor, your coworker, anyone. Just ask them where they come from. Get to hear their stories, and you'll be surprised with what you hear. And like earlier you said, Felicia, most of the refugees came here, they had a life. They were doctors, engineers, teachers. They had to come and work as an Uber driver or McDonald's. Nothing wrong with any job. But somebody worked hard to get their degree and come here and treat it as less than. I was treated differently because of my accent. And my accent was a lot heavier in 2001. I was looked at as incompetent at my college when I went and applied for a new career. I have a whole bachelor degree in electrical engineering. And when I started from zero, the teachers were thinking that I cannot make it. They were targeted. I was targeted. I was stopped by the police many times because I was driving a car that I shouldn't own. I hugged. You talked about hugging. My clinical rotation in psych, a young lady was talking about being trafficked, and that was too close to home. Being sexually assaulted, that was too close to home because I felt what she was talking about. Because I was sexually assaulted. I was nearly trafficked. So, as human, what I did, I hugged her. And the teacher was following me throughout the whole clinic because I was the only refugee in my clinic. And I was the second. There were two black young ladies in the rotation, and I was the black and refugee. So she gave me an F, wanted me to be expelled from the nursing program. I had to take it up to the dean, Dr.Palina, may he rest in peace, in Harrisburg. He stood by my side, and she was put in her place, basically. Most of the students in my class stood by my side, and some of the teachers. But I shouldn't have to go through this just because somebody doesn't understand or don't call me as a valued person. What you can do is when you see this thing happen every day, and we brush it because you are not the victim. You don't have to be a torture survivor. I don't wish this on nobody. You don't have to be sexually assaulted. You don't have to be, facing any racism or sexism or any phobia for you to act and care about others, because this is the basics of being human. And especially with this climate, we need you. We need all of you to stand and support. Not because your refugee friend or your neighbor or your black friends or black friend are weak. No, because the whole system, whether we like to admit it or not, is placed to put barriers. Systemic racism is true. Just like global warming, just like so many other issues, we try to not talk about it. So educating everybody that around you, not just yourself. Confront your own biases, but also confront other people's biases.
Well, how do you follow that? I'm going to align my contributions to this piece to the theme, seeing from the other side. I think it is important that you bring in voices, whether they're of your own, or voices from the community that have endured lived experience, that perhaps align with your policy agenda or your intentions to bring a policy forward. The science of storytelling is quite potent and quite effective. I use it a lot in everything that I do in teaching, in business operations. I wear many hats, but we were just in my organization, just launched our second annual global conference in Galway, Ireland, and it was climate and culture. So the implications and the impact of the evolving world at the local level, at the national level, or at the global level, and how it might shape and shift the way that we do business, the way that we live, and the way that we thrive in communities. And so it is important that as you're having conversations and dialogue, bring in the story, bring in a reflective piece that serves as the foundational base for why you're going to talk about what you're going to talk about, as the base for your objective for that meeting, for that policy. And I will tell you that that is proven to be quite an effective strategy. I've been often asked to give my story, but you have to make sure so she's a serial entrepreneur, and I call myself a musopreneur, an entrepreneur in the museum industry, but I also am in public health and healthcare as well as academia. But make sure that when you're telling the story or inviting somebody to come and share their stories, that they truly are aligned, and it's not from the context of the tokenism, oh, we're going to bring a brown person, or a yellow person, what I've been called, right, to the table. and we're going to have them talk, and by the way, thank you, here's a gift, and we won't see you again. That won't work. Your decision makers are going to see right through that, and it becomes the tokenism. So again, I just emphasize how important it is, whether you share your own story, your ancestral story, the community story, or that of a community's voice, a community member's voice. I'll stop there.
All right. An hour is not even nearly enough time to even scratch the surface of this. And I want to leave room for questions, and so please correct me if I am misunderstanding. But action items, and please write this down or contact me and I will send you a summary of the notes. Action items of how we as councils can start addressing this topic are to be curious, to ask questions. And it's okay, because if we're curious, it's always going to lead us to the direction of truth. If we continue to ask questions, it's going to lead us to the direction of truth. At the same time, we have to respect boundaries. If somebody is not comfortable telling their story or engaging in dialogue, that is perfectly fine as well. Sometimes we have to realize that when we ask the questions and we have the conversations, it can be more traumatic than what the person is prepared to do. But I think most importantly, my takeaway from this conversation is that we have to start being active allies. Oftentimes we're really good at passive allies, and I'll admit that we do the same thing through our lectures and our conversations and talking about topics, but we have to use our privilege and stand up for the truths that we know and the rights and the justices in order to establish a peaceful community. Sometimes we have to get into those really uncomfortable places and be active allies and draw attention to what we are seeing so that everybody can feel that peace in the community. Is there anything else in one sentence? That's not a fair question, but in one sentence, is there anything else that you would like to add? Yes does not count as one sentence.
I would say be very genuinely intentional in how you engage in that relationship by not asking the tell me about you, but what would you like people to know about your story? Oh, that was one sentence. That was pretty good.
All right, questions and answers, and I'm going to give the microphone to Emma to pass her home.
Raise your hand.
I'm interested in understanding your path to citizenship as a refugee.
Me, right?
I was
All right, so if I understand your question correctly, a lot of people think that coming to the U.S., I know some people come illegally, but for the most majority of people, they go through an extensive check. I was helped by the UN, and because my story was on the paper, it didn't mean a lot of documentation. So I stayed a whole year in Egypt. I was going through so many interviews with the IOM, which is the International Form of Migration, and then the CWS, the Joint World Services. So what they do, they go through lists of questioning, they check your references, they find why are you applying to be a refugee, especially for a political refugee. For me, I was one of 3 female in Sudan at that time, so everybody knew who I was. It was easy, but again, it was 8 months of physical exam, security checks, fingerprinting, my very first dentist exam as a 20 years old was in Egypt during my refugee area. So it wasn't an easy process. Then after 8 months, you after you get accepted, you have to wait to see your name on the list. You have to go every week, walk miles and miles. Then, if there is someone here that sponsor you, which means they will pay for you to stay with them, whether that be in a church or someone you know. And my sister was a political refugee before me. I came from a large family of activists. She was here in Philly, and she sponsored me, and that's what made it easy. Many refugees stay in camps for years. So it's a very, very hard process, trust me.
Actually, I wasn't interested in your refugee status.
Okay.
I'm interested in your citizenship status.
Oh, my citizenship. I've been a United States citizen since 2006. When you come here, when you get accepted, you come as a green card holder. You enter, you have to wait for 4 years. You have to apply like everyone else. You take the test, and you pass it, then you become a naturalized citizen. And you get your passport, you are a U.S. citizen by naturalization, which is different than born here. It gives you a lot of rights, but I can't be a president.
That's unfortunate.
I'll share really quick my family's citizenship journey. It was 6 years in the making. And my mother was required, because we were so young, my mother was required to take English courses for a minimum of 2 years. And then she would then apply to become a citizen. And so then she would journey by studying for the exam and then sit in front of the officials for them to ask a set of questions.
Many of our councils have the international visitors programs where it's sponsored by the State Department, where groups of international visitors come and spend some time in our communities. Is that a good gateway to use to address, to get into the population that's resident in the community?
Well, because we also host exchange programs, I think it would depend on the program, and whether or not it's related to the work that is taking place. So I don't really know quite how to answer that, other than, as we look at our professional resources and who we want to meet with, sometimes it's a positive to think outside the box and look at where are those diverse viewpoints and diverse voices going to come to the table and talk about the work they're doing. So an example is we just hosted a program on renewable energy, 11 different countries, 11 different community leaders. There is this incredible nonprofit in Utah that is looking at renewable energy resources for the refugee community. We have them as a professional resource, so it was this really interesting connection between talking about the theme of the program, but also how do these themes of the program relate to underrepresented communities that the international visitors might also be addressing in their own countries. So sometimes it just takes creativity and a whole lot of salesmanship with the Department of State rep that you're working with or the MBA. Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you for lighting the presentation. So one of the issues that we have at our councils is growing membership, trying to grow membership, and also changing the age limit. I'm representing the upper stratum. I'm wondering if you could give us some ideas about how could we engage the diaspora communities in our area to come and join us and learn from a lot of them, and they really tie in well to what all immigrants are. They're perhaps more recent ones that might be able to join our ranks and be able to enlighten us and join us.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. You know, I would hold a stakeholder meeting. I've done that many times where we would reach out to a larger organization that has a strong relationship with diverse communities. In Idaho, it's the Idaho Office for Refugees, but because I'm a longtime former refugee, I knew who to tap into. So I contacted like the Basque diaspora, contacted the Japanese diaspora, and the American Japanese with the internment camp, the Chinese, the leaders of the Chinese organization, and all of them just to say, you know, here's my objective that I'd like to meet with you to get your thoughts, and how do we carve this out together? And, you know, it would just be maybe 2 or 3 hours, and that really was an effective strategy that I continue to practice.
Thank you.
I will add to that the CWS. There are several organizations. CWS is the Church World Services, and it is a great organization in all 50 states. I actually was on the board of trustee with them. It was a whole circle. They helped me, and they helped so many refugees not assimilate, just think of integrate. You don't want someone to lose their identity. So when we say assimilation, we need to cross that. They help people to integrate, and you can reach out to them. They have connection with several refugee communities in the area. And this is a good step, us being here, talking. And like I said, just reach out to your neighborhood, your neighbors, and talk to them.
So we have time for one last quick question.
I'm Facilitarian from Columbus, Ohio. Thank you for coming. I think it's really enriching because we don't often hear this side of global. My question is kind of a tactical one, perhaps. You represent 3 states, and in Ohio, one of the biggest hurdles for refugees and other new Americans is like the licensure process at the state level, to be a doctor, teacher, whatever. Have any of you seen creative ways to overcome that barrier?
So, and there's an echo in the room, I have to say. Yeah, so if I understood your question correctly, are there creative ways to engage refugees, current and past, who have skill sets that you want to engage with?
Yeah, like a lot of state regulations around licensure. What is that? Did that come through?
I can actually hear you better without
Better
the
without the mic, actually.
Were you going to finish?
So we're talking about the program that I first mentioned where we were working with Dr. Wood, right? The barrier that we saw specifically for doctors who wanted to become doctors in Utah was that they had to pass 5 tests, and each test was $5,000. As a newly arrived refugee who can't apply for student loans yet, who probably is not working a job, on top of the expensive cost of living, paying $25,000 just to get back into a residency program, that's where everybody starts out, was an impossible hurdle, right? Through the Department of Workforce Services, so the state workforce services, we used some of our state funding to pay for those 5 tests, as well as trainings, study programs. And then once they took the 5 tests, then they could be accepted into the residency program. It's something that seemed impossible. It was an easy, inexpensive fix. And by the time I left to go work in the nonprofit sector, we had 5 individuals who were residents. They never thought that when they resettled in Utah that they could become doctors again. And all of a sudden, something that seemed impossible became possible. And so really it is looking at, okay, what are the technicalities that we have to overcome to get them back into the fields of training? So it's going to vary from state to state on some occupations, but it really is just doing the research and figuring out, okay, how do we pass hurdle 1, hurdle 2, hurdle 3?
If I may add, this is an amazing model. And if we follow it in all states, think of the possibilities. Only in Pennsylvania and in my family, like close family, there are 15 doctors, 2 surgeons, and maybe 12 engineers, electrical engineer, architect, and a civil engineer. Those are just the top of my head from my family and friends that I know who are currently working Uber drivers, working in warehouse. Again, nothing wrong with any job, but are we utilizing the resources? Are we utilizing the refugees and even the green card holder as lottery, green card holder to the best? As a state, I think if I pay and consider that as a student loan, for example, not a free money, we're going to make them pay for it. But I assure you, every doctor who practices in their country or just went to college there, they don't want to change their career. You don't just wake up and become a doctor by accident. It's still 12 years, you know. So if we provide them with maybe an advanced loan or something, come up with something, you will get to take the test, you get to practice. We as a state will benefit from your expertise, and you can pay after that. If I was able to continue my electrical engineering, maybe it won't be electrical, but I will continue that, right? So it's like we need to think outside of the box and see how we can utilize, and instead of looking at refugees as someone who's coming here to take our jobs, eat our cats and dogs, here. But like, if look at them as the other. Look at them as someone who's coming here with a handout to collect welfare. Does that mean there is no refugees or bad and coming and leaving of the system? I'll be lying if I said no. There are people, but the same as in every society, we have the bad and the good, and we can't isolate and say refugees are here to take our jobs. Most definitely, they are here to better their lives, and they can bring something if we allow them or help them to do so.
I think that there might be untapped resources in your communities, in your state, that has an established program. So in Idaho, we have what we call Global Talent. So it is a nonprofit focused on helping to place refugees with skill set in industry sectors that align with their passion, with their training. Global Talent is the organization name, and so your state might be called something else, but it is an organization that was stood up by the Idaho Office of Refugees, Agency for New Americans, and International Rescue Committee. So those are the refugee agencies that I would encourage you to seek out and explore. Where are they? What are they doing? How can we help to be part of this? And how can we bring the broader communities in the next generation of thought leaders, our future, across all cultures, established or new, into this conversation to help build a more connected community going forward?
All right, I just want to say thank you for sharing your time, your talent, your knowledge with us today, and certainly as the theme of the conference, helping us see from the other side. So thank you. Please give them a hand.
Amazing conversation. Give it up one more time. So while everyone is situated, our next presentation, we're shifting a little bit, will be about council values and the importance of having them in your